So the task one, which you are supposed to do as a group, is where are we? Is that there are two types of funds available. You can invest in the stock fund. The stocks are the market shares, the shares available in the stock market. The second possibility is that there's a bond fund. The bond here means the government bond, the bonds issued by the state. Okay. The bonds are more or less riskless because these are issued by the state, and then the governments, the states normally never fail. The probability of the failure or a bankruptcy of a state is very low in comparison to a company. So because the bonds are issued by the state, the treasury of the state, and these are supported or backed up by the state, therefore the probability of the bankruptcy is low, hence they are safe or the safest, but at the same time, their return is very low. You know, have you heard the saying that no pains, no gains? Pains, if you take less risk, you earn less money. If you take more risk, you may earn more money. Stocks are risky. The stock fund is risky. Okay, in the bad times you may lose everything, but in the good times you can multiply your wealth so much. So the element of risk is more in the stocks because they are issued by the private sector, the private companies. The private companies do get bankrupt. So the question here is that if you want to see, this is like a client coming to you and asking, Miss Fund Manager or Mr. Fund Manager, I'm planning to invest. Please give me two options. Can you offer me some options? And then you say to your client, hey, yes, I want to know how much risk you can face. I want to know about you. Like when you talk to your financial consultant, it's like talking to a doctor, basically. Just when you visit the surgery, the doctor first time, the doctor would ask you a few questions. What are you doing? What's your profession? Does your profession require too much of sitting, or is it that you are always traveling? Do you drink too much coffee when you're traveling? So all these questions, before you choose a fund, the fund manager would ask you several questions. That the first question, or at least the definite question he would ask you, is that what type of risk you can face. If the investor is saying that, yes, I'm willing to face the risk, I'm a risk lover, I love risk, then the consultant may ask that you should spend larger proportion of your wealth in stocks. And if explicitly, clearly or indirectly, you as a financial analyst can find out that, you know what, this investor is a risk-averse investor. Therefore, the financial analyst, that's you, would recommend him or her to invest more in the bond fund, which is comparatively less risky. All right. But is it everything? No. The companies exist in the country, and in the country, there could be macroeconomic risk. This is why I always emphasize to my students that if you want to study finance, you must be good at macroeconomics. Macroeconomics can really help you to understand the nitty-gritty of financial world in a really cool manner. All right, and then you find out, and then you discuss with your client that Mr. Customer or Mr. Investor or Miss whatever, there is a 30% chance, focus on the cursor, there is a 30% probability that there would be recession this year. And there is a 40%, where is the cursor lost? Yeah. A 40% probability or possibility or likelihood is that there'll be a normal market situation, nothing unusual, business as usual. But then there's a 30% probability that the market would be boom, it will go up like anything. So these are the things. And then the customer says, I think you're confusing me. Can you make some rough estimate for me how much I'm likely to earn? All right. And let's say, based on this assessment, the financial analyst find that the investor, the client, is willing to invest 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. Let's say this is his assessment. His means the financial analyst's assessment. Please tell me, if a client comes to your desk and you can make out that for this investors, 60% stock and 40% bond is good combination. What type of investor would be? If you as a financial analyst can make out that I think for this client, 60-40 combination of stock and the bond would be a good starting point, then what type of category the investor belongs to? Remember, we have three categories of, based on risk. We have risk lover. People are really risk lover. Hey, I only want to invest in the high-tech companies, only 2 stocks. I don't care if I lose. I'm prepared for the loss, but I'm also looking for the 100% growth in my profits, in my wealth. The second extreme investor could be who says that no, absolute no risk. I want to take the least possible risk in the market. That is called risk averse investor. The investor is averse to investor. I can say risk hater investor. The third category is in between, which is risk neutral. Risk neutral, which means that can be on the either side depending upon the situation. So this investor can change the stance. Like, for example, we have the rich class, we have the poor class, and we have the middle income class. So same way, we have the risk lover investors, very, they can go to any extreme. Then we have the risk hater. Hater, we don't see the word in the literature. We use it risk averse investors, AVERSE, averse. And the third category is in between, called risk neutral investors who may take risk. So if you see the 60-40 proportion, who you think this investor is? Who you think this investor is? Any guesses? No guesses? Yep. I agree and disagree with you at the same time. This investor is investing 60% of his wealth in stocks. Definitely, he likes to have risk, right? But he is not a really risk lover. He's a bottom line risk lover, Like, for example, have you heard that we have rich people, we have middle income people, but in the middle class, we have upper middle class and the lower middle class. This middle class is very confusing people. So he's a kind of confused investor. He is neither risk lover, because I would say if he were a risk lover, it would have been almost 90% or 100% in stocks. And if he were a risk averse investor, he would have been opposite. maybe 10% in stocks and 90% in the bond. But because here the ratio is 60-40, which is not far away from 50-50, right? So he's a risk neutral, but little bit, he has slight inkling to take risk. So I would say he's more or less a risk neutral sort of investor, right? Then he will ask you, the next question he will ask you that, hey, imagine this year there is recession. Can you please find out how much I'm likely to earn? So, there are three situations. Why it doesn't go? Yeah. So there is there is 30% chance that there will be recession. Now he's asking you how much I'm likely to earn if there is recession. And now the story begins. Now the financial analyst that is you will say, and guess what? If there is a recession, which is 30% chance, if you invest in the stocks, you would lose 11%. See the minus sign? You may lose. I shouldn't say will, but may lose 11%. But if you invest all money in the bond, you will earn 16%. But if you invest, if there's a normal situation, which is 40% chance, you will have 30% return in the stocks, but you will have 6% return in the bonds. And if the market is really great, it's a good year, you will have 27% return in the stocks, but you would lose 4% in the bond fund. These numbers are slightly exaggerated, but I didn't choose these numbers just randomly. These numbers, minus 11 in recession, plus 16 in recession, 27 minus 4, they are clearly indicating a idea, some sense. I want you to observe it and find out that when you see this column C and this column E, considering recession, normal, and boom, what type of idea you make out? Can you make out some idea, some thoughts? And I assure you that these numbers I didn't pick up randomly. There's a reason for this. These numbers, the amount of numbers can be exaggerated, but the degree, the direction, the logic of these numbers gives you a message. Your job is to unpack or discover this message. In column C and column E, I'm giving you a puzzle based on recession, normal, and boom. Your job is to solve the puzzle. And your time starts now. You guys have found it right. There is a reason for it. And you both are right. That when there is a recession, see the recession, the markets are crashing. There's unemployment. Factories are closing down. People are not having enough money to buy things. The company's inventory is increasing, but nobody's buying from them. Banks have lots of money to lend, but there are no good borrowers. Nobody wants to borrow money because what would you do with the borrowed money? Invest? We are in recession. Who will invest in recession? So in that case, the stock market earnings are very low expected. That's why you see that the number is very low. I put it minus 11%, but the point is that they would be very low. On the contrary, many people would like to invest in the government bonds. At least they're safe, right? The return may not be so much, but they're safe, right? So you can see that in recession, the bond fund return is 16%, which is higher than the stock fund return, which is minus 11%. All right. If you see the other extreme, when the market is really cool, really up, is progressing, developing. Stock markets are doing great. There is inflation, lots of jobs being created. People are employed. They are working day and night shifts. Lots of exports, lots of money is generated. The company's reputation is going up. Lots of foreign exchange is coming. The stock market will go up. Stock market is a barometer of your economic activities going on. And when everything is goody-goody, it's a boom time, then the stock market will go up. And when the stock market will go up, why should you invest in the bond fund, boring bond funds? Who will invest in the safe fund? This is a time when the market is really going up. Make hay while the sun shines. Make use of this situation. So this is why there'll be not many people investing in the bond fund when there's a boom time, because you don't get much money in there. On the contrary, in the stock markets, the rate of return can be 27%, which is very high. And it's a fact. During 90s, in the first half of 90s, if you see, the global economy was doing wonders. If you look at the rate of growth of the stock prices of all the major stock exchanges in the world during the first half of 90s, you will find that the stock prices were really going upwards. It would have been almost foolish to invest in the bond fund. And the reason was that the mid-90s, from 90s to mid-90s, was a time when the IT companies were really doing wonders. The NASDAQ, Silicon Valley, there was this unparalleled revolution called IT revolution was going on in the USA and rest of the countries. And at the same time, countries like India, China, Southeast Asian countries, European companies, they were also making use of that success. So the success, remember, success and failure is contagious, infectious. If it happens in one country, it also spreads over. All right. So if there's a recession in one country, for example, if there is a recession in the US, there would be, you can also have the bad impact in the other countries also. And if America or any other leading countries, for example, China, if there is a threat in China of economic slowdown, all the major economies will also be scared. Oh my gosh, what shall we do if this threat turns reality? All right. So success and failure are infectious. They are in today's globalized world. These things are not confined in your boundaries. They go beyond the boundaries. I hope it makes sense. Okay. Anyways, we're coming back to the question. The investor asked you, what would I earn if I invest 60% in stocks, 40% in the bonds, and there is recession? Well, in that case, my dear potential client, you will be losing -2% because 60% in stocks, which is -11% return, 40% in the bonds, which is 16% return. If you find the sum of this, if you multiply this with this, it comes out to be 0.66%. No, actually it comes to be 6.6%, but with a minus sign. But if you multiply 0.40 with 16%, it comes to be plus 6.4. It leaves you. So the portfolio return, which you will be getting, is -2% or -20%. And now you can, so this is, look, this -0.2% is a calculation. Implication is that if there is recession, the investor would be losing his or her wealth by 0.2%. The interpretation is that if the investor is investing 60-40 in stock and bond, the investor would be losing minus 2% of his or her wealth. The implication is that, hey, Mr. Risk neutral investor, if you are so scared of recession, I would say change your bonds, change your weight. So instead of 60-40, if you invest 80% here, let's say 50-50, or reverse them 60-40, not 60-40, but 40-60, this 60 and this 40, you may earn some positive return. Imagine the investor says, oh my gosh, I'm scared. I would be losing minus 2%. Then you can give a suggestion or an implication that why don't you reverse the weight? Why don't you invest 60% in the bonds and 40% in the stocks? Then you can have a positive return. Or if you can increase the weight on the bond and you can reduce the weight on the stocks, then you can be earning more wealth. Yes.
When someone interested on the market, the rate.
Well, if you're a risk lover investor, then you can go for it and you can say that, all right, let's say, remember, these are imaginary situations. These are not, you are doing it before it happens. Timing is very important. You are not doing it after it happened. You are doing it in anticipation. And if you're a risk lover investor, all right, then you say that, all right, this is a recession. I know a recession can happen, but boom can also happen. I'm ready for boom. I'm looking for the boom time. And if in the process, I lose money, if recession happens, all right, I'm ready for it. I have a big heart. I'm a risk lover investor, right? So all these things, you're doing it. So you will be giving different medicines to different patients according to their health, according to the condition. Some patients, they want to have quick recovery. I want speedy recovery. Then you change the weight. You change the weight accordingly. Some people say, don't worry, I'm willing to be bedridden for 1 week, but I want a slow treatment. Then you change these weights. So depending upon your client, depending upon your investor, you will be giving them different portfolio suggestions. All right. If you're an extreme risk lover investor, then you don't care about this minus 0.2%. Yeah. Okay. Same way, the same person asked you, if I want to keep 60-40, I don't want to change 60-40. And what if there is normal time? Number one. And number two, I stick with 60-40. And what if there is a boom time? Well, that's your job to do. That's your task one. I have done for recession. You'll be doing for normal time and the boom time. All right. And one more thing. The investor can ask you that, hey, regardless of recession, regardless of boom, regardless of normal time, how much I would be earning for the overall situation, recession, boom, normal time. So if I have the overall time period, how much I will earn. So these three calculations you are supposed to do. Number one, rate of return in the boom time. Number two, the rate of return in the normal time. In both these situations, you will keep your weight 60-40, don't change it. And then if you still keep 60-40, what is the overall, overall expected rate of return? So these three things you will be doing by yourself. That will make your task one. All right? Make sense? Well, this is a formulation, but don't worry about this. Do you like this calculation? Are they nice? Can you remember them? I give you 2 minutes to remember it. Will you remember it? Or will you even be able to learn it? Well, these are on purpose given to you. I deliberately gave you the formulation, but the life in this world is very easy now, yeah? So if you go by the theory, these are the calculations which you are supposed to do, but don't worry, I just wanted to scare you. We shall be using the Excel function, so you don't have to memorize it. So I'm just giving you a picture that before the time the computers were introduced, people were doing all these difficult formulation with hand. All right. So this slide I want to give to you, to show it to you, to be thankful to the technology, that your life is much easier, that you don't have to remember and calculate according to this very scary, intimidating formulas. I want to discuss with you something about the, I think I asked you a couple of times that how many of you have studied statistics? Have you? Statistics, have you? Yeah? Okay. I want to know something from you. I want to know something from you. What is standard deviation? Number one. You can write down the concepts. And during I will give you some time and you sit as a group and try to work out these things. So my first question to you will be, what is standard deviation? Number two, variance. So maybe I can write down so that you don't forget it. So during the break, not a break, actually, after I finish writing on the board, I would give you 5 minutes time, not more than 5. You have to be very quick. And you work out standard deviation. Number two, variance. Number three, covariance. Number four, correlation. And number five, regression. So these 5 terms you will be exploring by yourself. And when we meet after 10 minutes, we shall be discussing, not me, you will be discussing about it. Okay, so I give you some time, 10 minutes to prepare. Okay, the next thing I want to discuss with you is that you can see here in this example, I'm measuring the standard deviation on the x-axis. Yeah. Standard deviation is what? Standard deviation is the reflection of risk. Do you know that we discussed before? Standard deviation shows how much risk you face. Risk is a qualitative thing. Standard deviation is a quantification of a quality. If I say you are intelligent, it's a quality. But if I say you are intelligent because your grades are 5, it's a quantity now. So standard deviation is a technique which we use to quantify the risk. And the performance is on the y-axis here. Performance means the stock performance. How the rate at which your wealth or investment is growing. And here you find out that when the correlation between the stocks is +1. And one more thing I must tell you about correlation is that the correlation can be maximum +1 and the minimum -1. The correlation can be extremely positive if it is +1, and correlation is extremely negative if it is -1. And you can see here that in this example, it's very important that you realize it. This is return. This is risk. For sure, all these lines show one thing, that higher the risk, higher is the return. That's truth. But are they showing same amount of risk and return? No. The risk and return differ because here the correlation is +1. Here the correlation is 0.3. And then we have extremely strange combination where risk is -1. When you see these pictures, this picture, can you make some sense out of it? Can you? Any observation? Just observe this picture, or maybe here, because here it's much better. This is just a rough draft. Can you draw some conclusions based on it? Can you or can you not? I can draw, I can make your life easy. I make two conclusions out of this picture. The first conclusion is that more risk, more return. Have you seen any curve here when the risk is going down and the return is going up? Or the risk is going up and the return is going down? In all cases, the picture is going upward. The line, the curve is going upwards, yeah? The second thing, which is very important, is that when the correlation is very high, look, the highest correlation is this. To get the same return, let's say 10%, you face, to get the same return of 10%, you get, let's say 5% return, risk, yeah? Risk is 5%, return is 10%. But when the correlation decreases from 1 to 0.3, your risk doesn't change, but the return goes to 12%. And when the correlation is -1, for the same risk, the return can be 20%. What does it mean? It means that as the correlation decreases, for the same amount of risk, your return increases even more. Remember, I'm making two very important statements, and please disagree with me wherever you are, where you find it necessary. Listen again. The first observation, mark my words. As the risk increases, return increases. So you can see here, as the standard deviation goes up, the return also goes up in all cases. In all cases. So the line are facing upwards trend. But the question is that when the correlation is the highest, for the same risk, return is low. But when the correlation go from +1 to 0.3%, for the same risk, return is higher. And it's the highest when the correlation is -1, which means that when the correlation is negative, extremely negative, for the same risk, return is the highest. That's my theory. That's my idea. Does it make sense or not? Can you name me two stocks, two companies' shares whose correlation is extremely positive? Huh? This one?
No,
-1?
Yeah.
Okay. When the correlation is -1, it means that the correlation between two stocks is negative. Okay? Negative, highest negative. -1 is the extremely negative association, right? Then for the same risk, return is the highest. But when the correlation is highest positive, for the same risk, the return is not so high. That's my point. It means that the correlation changes the relationship between risk and return. They remain positive, but how positive? How much positive? That depends upon the correlation. Okay, but for this thing, you need to understand one thing: the diversification. Imagine you are investing in Coke and Pepsi. Somebody has invested in Coke and Pepsi together. What do you think will be the correlation of the stock return of Coke and Pepsi? Negatively correlated or positively correlated? Huh? If you invest in Coke and Pepsi, you think that the stock return of Coke and Pepsi is negatively correlated or positively correlated? Positively, because they're almost same companies. There's hardly any difference between them.
The Coca sell more, and
Huh?
if the Coca sell more product and the Pepsi sell less product, they are competitor.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know.
So I think because that's
What made you say that Coke's return is increasing and Pepsi's is decreasing? It's your assumption.
yeah.
It's your assumption, yeah?
Yes.
But if you look at Coke and Pepsi, by nature, can you visualize Coke plant where they're producing bottles of Coke and the Pepsi plant, they're bottling their things? Do you find any difference between them? Of course, they're different, but do you think that they are very different from one another? Okay, who is more correlated, Coke and Pepsi or Coke and HSBC Bank? Huh? Who's more correlated? Coke and Pepsi, but not Coke and HSBC Bank. Why not? Because they're in the same industry. All the macroeconomic factor, all the technological changes which are affecting Coke are affecting Pepsi also. Both are in the US, so any US law change affects the Coke and Pepsi together. Can I say the same thing about Microsoft and Apple? Whose stocks are more correlated, Microsoft and Apple or Microsoft and Air Canada? I was looking for some example. Huh? Who is more correlated? Because they are in the same industry, same sector, same country. How about BP and Shell? You know Shell Petroleum, yeah? BP, British Petroleum, and then BP and Prisma. You know Prisma? Or Lidl, for example. BP and Lidl and BP and Shell. Who's more correlated? For sure, because they are in the same company, not same company, but same industry, same sector. So those stocks who are more correlated, they give you less return for the same risk. But as this correlation decreases, let's say you have one stock of BP, one share of BP, and the second belongs to, for example, IKEA, you know, this famous consumer product. Or if you have one stock of British Airlines, or let's say Finnair, and the second stock is of Kone Lift, they're less correlated, yeah? So as this correlation decreases, then for the same amount of risk, your return increases. I would say if I'm investing in Coke and Pepsi, there's no real difference in the nature of my investment, because Coke and Pepsi have almost same consumer base. They have operations over 100 countries. The products are very similar. All right. So basically, I'm not really investing in two different companies. Same way, if I invest in British Airways, well, it doesn't exist anymore, Air France or Lufthansa, basically, I'm not investing in two different companies, except that one is in France and the second is in Germany, and the French and the German government policies can make some difference, but otherwise, by nature, by operations, by their actions, these two companies are more or less very much similar, comparable. Are you with me? As the companies become less and less correlated, for the same risk, return increases. That's my hypothesis. That's my message to you. I want you to take some break now. Well, actually,